There is a part of American history that most people feel, but almost no one can articulate. A truth so deeply woven into the past century that it hides in plain sight, disguised behind patriotic slogans, heroic storytelling, and the language of necessity. It is the truth that America did not simply fight wars, it learned how to profit from them, how to turn conflict into capital, death into dividends, and global instability into a dependable, renewable income stream. This is not conspiracy. This is accounting, military budgets, bond issuances, interest payments, defense contracts, and balance sheets written in the ink of human blood. The United States didn't just build a military. It built an economy of conflict, a system where war is not just an event, but a business model. And to understand how this happened, we must return to the spark that ignited the modern age of financial warfare. The year is 1914. Europe is tearing itself apart. Empires that had dominated the world for centuries suddenly find themselves trapped in a vortex of industrial slaughter. Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, all of them burning through ammunition, weapons, food, machinery, and most importantly, money. Their treasuries drain faster than their armies can march. And thousands of miles away, watching quietly, stands the United States. American factories begin to hum. Railroads scream with movement. Ships creak under the weight of supplies. And at the center of this economic awakening sits J.P. Morgan, acting not just as a banker, but as the unofficial financial nerve center of the Allied war effort. Morgan arranges billions in loans, some so large they surpass the entire U.S. federal budget. And every bullet shipped across the Atlantic is an interest-bearing line on a ledger. Remember this. America was financially invested in the outcome of World War I long before it ever fired a single shot. By the time the U.S. enters the war officially in 1917, the financial entanglement is complete. If Britain and France collapse, American banks collapse with them. And so the public is pulled in, emotionally, patriotically, financially. Liberty bonds flood the nation. Posters scream, "Buy a bond, defeat the enemy." Children collect pennies. Workers hand over their wages. Celebrities march on stage urging citizens to support the boys overseas. But behind the speeches and celebration lies the hidden architecture. Millions of ordinary Americans lend money to the government, so corporations and banks can profit from war. Factories surge, dividends climb, and Wall Street learns its first great wartime lesson. War can be monetized if you sell it correctly. This model didn't end with the armistice. It evolved, it scaled. It became the backbone of the American century. When World War II explodes across Europe, the machinery reactivates instantly. Before Pearl Harbor, before the U.S. ever declares war, American industry has already transformed itself into the greatest manufacturing force on Earth. Planes, tanks, rifles, ships, built at unimaginable speed. But the real engine sits behind the battlefield, the bond machine. Over 85 million Americans buy war bonds. $185 billion is raised, nearly half the entire cost of the war. And once again, the pattern repeats. The public funds the war through debt. Corporations profit through contracts. Banks profit through interest. And the government gains financial power it never wants to surrender. Yet something far bigger happens beneath the surface. Something that will change the global financial order forever. The United States pauses gold convertibility during the war. It doesn't look dramatic at the time, a temporary measure, they said. But in reality, it marks the quiet death of the traditional monetary system. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the nations of the world gathered to rebuild the shattered global economy. And they agree on something enormous. The US dollar becomes the world's reserve currency. Not because of peace, but because of war. European economies are ruined. American factories are dominant. American banks are flush with interest-bearing war loans, and America holds most of the world's gold. World War II doesn't just crown the U.S. a military victor, it establishes it as the financial empire of the modern age. And this is where the story shifts from pattern to design, because once you build an economy that thrives on wartime spending, something dangerous happens. You must keep the engine running. Enter the Cold War, the era of permanent mobilization. Global tension becomes normal. Defense spending becomes mandatory. Entire regions of the U.S. come to depend on military bases, factories, and research labs for jobs and economic stability. Economists call it military Keynesianism, the idea that government spending on war production keeps the economy alive. But underneath the polite academic language is a disturbing truth. The U.S. economy has become structurally addicted to conflict. Without billion-dollar contracts, without rising defense budgets, without new threats to respond to, entire industries would collapse. And so, the money flows. Through Korea, through Vietnam, through the arms race, through CIA covert operations and proxy wars, through the development of jet fighters, missiles, submarines, satellites, and nuclear technology. Yet the Vietnam War exposes the fragility of the system. Costs explode. Inflation spirals. The dollar faces a crisis. Foreign governments start demanding gold in exchange for dollars, exactly what the U.S. Treasury fears. So in 1971, President Richard Nixon takes a step that forever rewires global finance. He ends the gold standard. The dollar becomes fiat, backed by nothing but trust, power, and military dominance. And once the dollar is no longer constrained by gold, war financing becomes limitless. Deficits rise. Spending explodes. Debt becomes the lifeblood of the empire. But a fiat dollar requires a new foundation, a new anchor. And in the 1970s, the United States finds one: oil. America forms an agreement with Saudi Arabia ensuring that oil, the world's most critical commodity, will be sold exclusively in US dollars. The petrodollar is born. And from that moment on, every nation on earth needs dollars to buy oil. And to get dollars, they must buy U.S. bonds. It is a masterstroke of financial geopolitics. War, money, and global power fused into a single system. Move into the 1990s and the Gulf War, and you see the same machine running smoother than ever. Precision weapons turn the conflict into a worldwide broadcast event. Defense company stock prices rise in real time. War becomes spectacle and business. But everything before pales in comparison to the next chapter. September 11, 2001. The attacks are horrifying. The fear is real. And within weeks, America enters what will become the longest and most expensive conflict in its history. The war on terror costs an estimated $6 trillion when factoring lifetime veteran care and interest on the debt. Think about that. $6 trillion. Enough to reshape the nation's economic destiny. Enough to fund healthcare, education, infrastructure, space exploration, and research. But instead, trillions flow into the old familiar channels. Defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Halliburton, Raytheon. Banks that facilitate government debt. Politicians whose districts rely on weapons factories for employment. The public, again, carries the cost through taxes, inflation, and rising national debt. And once more, the winners remain the same. The most disturbing part? These wars rarely produce decisive victories. Vietnam was lost. Iraq spiraled into chaos. Afghanistan collapsed the moment America withdrew. But from a financial perspective, they succeeded spectacularly. Because war, for those at the top, is not about winning. War is about spending. Now zoom out, look at the world today. Look at the crises that seem to arrive like clockwork. Financial crashes, geopolitical conflicts, energy disruptions, currency stress, inflation waves. Every single one of them interacts with the same machinery built during the age of war finance. When the 2008 crisis hits, what happens? Trillions are created. Corporations are rescued. Banks survive. Ordinary families lose their homes. The wartime financial playbook, deficit spending, emergency liquidity, corporate guarantees, becomes the peacetime playbook. During the pandemic, the same pattern repeats. Trillions are printed. Corporate profits surge. The public receives temporary relief, then pays for it through inflation. The line between war finance and economic policy doesn't just blur. It disappears. This is the final truth. America no longer needs war to run the war economy. The system runs continuously, in crisis, in peace, in fear, in uncertainty. Because once you normalize a financial model built on conflict and debt become permanent. So what should you take from all of this? First, if you want to understand global events, follow the money, not the speeches. Second, war is no longer a battlefield problem, it is a financial strategy. And strategies do not disappear. Third, your wallet is now part of the war economy. Inflation, taxes, interest rates, and debt are all downstream effects of a system built to keep money flowing to those who profit from instability. And here's the question you must now ask yourself. If the economy benefits from conflict, if the financial system depends on instability, then what exactly is the incentive for peace? If this opened your eyes, then tell me in the comments. Which part shocked you the most? The war bonds, the petrodollar, the trillions spent, or the financial playbook repeating today? And for more investigations into the hidden mechanics of money, power, and history, subscribe to the Fiscal Archivist. Here, we decode the world they hope you never understand.